As I've said to you many times, every day that goes by in this country, you lose a little more of your freedom. They ban more and more products and make your life more and more difficult and miserable. Who are they? Obama and his vast army of faceless, nameless bureaucrats. That's who they are. The leaders of which hide out in the Environmental Protection Agency over there at the Interior Department, some of the other buildings. That's not to say there aren't patriots, freedom fighters in these departments. But the truth is, the people who run them are quite the opposite. They're big government bureaucrats. There's a great piece on a website called The Lid. Yid with the Lid. That's his name for his website. You're not going to believe this. Well, you'll believe it, but it's just so outrageous. You work hard every day, or if you don't have a job, you're trying to find a job. You're paying taxes. You're told you really ought to pay more. You got to pay your fair share, and your fair share is always more than what you're paying, apparently. And you're told if you don't pay these taxes, then people with Down syndrome and autistic kids and so forth are going to go without. And then I'm going to show you a story like this, and you're going to say, what the hell? And that's exactly what you ought to say. New study says electric cars not so green. Now remember, Obama wants to buy 1 million of them with your tax dollars for the federal government to prop up the UAW and others. Global warming moonbats, writes The Lid, believe that electric cars are one of the major solutions to the problem of man-made global warming, which is causing the snow caps to melt and animals to die and your public library to run out of the book you've always been waiting to read. According to a new study, electric cars could produce higher emissions over their lifetimes than gas equivalents. And by the way, this isn't a conservative think tank study. This study comes out of Britain, among other places. According to the study, an electric car owner would have to drive at least 80,000 miles before producing a net saving in CO2. But many electric cars will not travel that far in their lifetime because they typically have a range of less than 90 miles on a single charge and are unsuitable for long trips. Even those driven 100,000 miles would save only about a ton of CO2 over their lifetimes. Much of the CO2 produced by electric cars is produced in the process of manufacturing the batteries. The story says the study was commissioned by the Low Carbon Vehicle Partnership, which is jointly funded by the British government and the car industry. It found that a mid-size electric car would produce 23.1 tons of CO2 over its lifetime, compared with 24 tons for a similar gasoline car. That's 23.1 versus 24. But listen to this. Emissions from manufacturing electric cars are at least 50% higher because batteries are made from materials such as lithium, copper, and refined silicon, which require more energy to be processed. Many electric cars are expected to need a replacement battery after a few years. Once the emissions from producing the second battery are added in, the total CO2 from producing an electric car rises to 12.6 tons, compared with 5.6 tons for producing a gasoline car. Disposal also produces a double the emissions because of the energy consumed in recovering and recycling metals in the battery. The study also took into account carbon emitted to generate the grid electricity that's consumed. The point is, from production to recycling, the life of the automobile, replacing batteries, far more CO2 is produced with an electric car, a mid-size electric car, than a mid-size gasoline car. Greg Archer, director of Low CVP, said the industry should state the full life cycle emissions of cars rather than just tailpipe emissions to avoid misleading consumers. He said that drivers wanting to minimize emissions could be better off buying a small, efficient gasoline or diesel car. He said people have to match the technology to their particular needs. So this study makes you wonder why the United States is creating a market for a product where there's no demand and no ecological advantage. Folks, we all have to get into the habit of thinking, or at least having an instinct, and most of us do, but some of you who don't, which says that when the government gets involved in something, it's going to screw it up. Because that's the history of government intervention. Light bulbs with mercury. Toilets that don't flush properly. Electric cars that produce more CO2 in their lifetime from production to junking than a normal gas or diesel car. And yet our entire society is put to the test every time one of these egghead ideas come forward. Unproven egghead ideas. And yet you have to look not just at one issue, but look across the board. What is our government up to? What are these people up to? Look at this one. I couldn't wait to bring you this one. From the home repair website. The EPA has done it again, this time with their lead rule. Their lead rule. They take a known health risk like lead paint exposure, and 33 years after lead paint stopped being used in homes, 1978, the EPA lumbers into action with what is known as the lead paint rule. The rule is technically called the Lead Renovation, Repair, and Painting Program. It's intended to address lead-based paint hazards created by activities from renovation, repair, and painting that disturb lead-based paint in target housing and child-occupied facilities for children 6 years and under. A laudable objective maybe sometime in the past 30 years, but now, when the minimum threshold of what the Center for Disease Control considers an elevated blood lead level of children under 6 has been reduced already to less than 0.5% of all children under 6 years, meaning the problem is already 99.5% solved, this rule is a classic example of expensive government overregulation and diminishing returns. Although the rule went into effect last year, the EPA is now flexing its enforcement muscle. The price for non-compliance and not respecting the EPA's authority, try fines up to $37,500 per day per violation. We're talking about house painters. One Rockland, Maine contractor, Colin Wentworth, is now facing $150,000 in violations from the EPA. This EPA rule requires that contractors performing renovation, repair, and painting projects involving more than 6 square feet of painted surfaces in a room for interior projects, or more than 20 square feet of painted surfaces for exterior projects, or window replacement or demolition in target housing and child-occupied facilities built before 1978. Now a project over 6 square feet may be treated like a hazmat situation for painting purposes. These new procedures include certification of the contractor's company, certification and training of the contractor's staff, posting warning signs on the risk of lead poisoning, containing or enclosing the work area with plastic sheets. Yes, they will end up in the landfill. Use of special HEPA standards and other equipment, preventing common paint removal tools such as heat guns, wetting down the work area, daily wet mopping, documentation, and record keeping of how the rules was adhered to in maintaining those records for 3 years in case of an EPA audit, quote, educating the occupants of the home about the hazards and risks of lead painting exposure during construction, and giving them an EPA brochure called the Lead Safe Certified Guide to Renovate Right, and so on. House painters. Residential painting. So the same authority granted the EPA administrators that allowed it to declare carbon dioxide an environmental pollutant, yet encourages you to fill your home with neurotoxin mercury vapor-filled CFL lamps, light bulbs, through its Energy Star division, is now declaring with its new EPA rule that drilling into your plaster wall, which was painted sometime in its history with lead paint, creates a dangerous lead dust hazard. This will put many people out of business, and you may say, well, I'll do it myself. You don't think that's going to apply to you? You don't think they'll punish you? So now they're in your home. When it comes to light bulbs, when it comes to painting, when it comes to your toilet and shower head, water flow, they're there. Now the question is, what are the limits now that they have violated our space, violated our privacy rights, what the libs always talk about when we're talking about heinous criminals. But when we're talking about law-abiding citizens, that's a whole other story whenever it comes to the Bill of Rights. But this whole notion that they talk about a privacy right, which actually isn't in the Constitution, this privacy right, which the courts have created when it comes to destroying fetuses, when it comes to protecting criminals, where is the privacy right for the average American who wants to paint their damn house? Or use whatever damn light bulb they want? Or flush a toilet that actually works? Where's their privacy rights? There aren't any.